Speaker, I recently met with a pharmacy in Bruton in my constituency to hear about some of the challenges they are facing. Community pharmacists are dispensing some of the country's most widely prescribed drugs at a loss, therefore subsidising the NHS. What steps is her department taking to prevent the closure of community pharmacists?
We are ensuring that community pharmacists have an even greater role in primary care than they have already. For example, the rollout of Pharmacy First, we've seen the first stage of that in December with blood pressure checks and contraceptive care being rolled out, and I'm very pleased that we are on track to deliver Pharmacy First, the full rollout, by the end of the month.
Sir Geoffrey Sabbett.
Mr. Speaker, the colour of someone's skin should not impact the reliability of medical devices, but we know that's what happened during the pandemic for many Black and Asian patients. That's why I commissioned as Health Secretary an independent review of the equity of medical devices by Professor Dame Margaret Whitehead. That report was published and handed to the Department in June of last year, but the Department has not yet published it or responded to it. Now, I know that my right honourable friend cares about health inequalities as much as I do. Can I ask her to publish it with a full government response as a matter of urgency?
May I thank my right honourable friend for commissioning this vitally important piece of work. I'm giving this my closest attention, and I very much hope to be in a position to answer his response in due course.
Karen McCarthy.
This week, the Riverside unit in my constituency, which treats young people with severe eating disorders, has had to temporarily close because of concerns about its ability to provide safe care. What is the government doing to ensure that young people who are often going through mental health crises as a result of their eating disorders get the care that they need as close to home as possible?
Well, the Honourable Lady will know that we're investing more in mental health services, particularly for young people and particularly for eating disorders, and we're seeing more young people quicker than ever before. But if there is a particular local issue that she has, I'm very happy to meet with her to discuss.
Kevin Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The opening of a new operating theatres block next month marks the latest investment in Torbay Hospital. But of course, this will be a prelude to the major rebuild. When does the Secretary of State plan to give the next update on the progress being made with that project?
I'm delighted that the House is as happy about the expansion as he and I are. I will meet the honourable gentleman to go through his plans, because I know how carefully he has campaigned for this important new asset in his constituency.
Catherine Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the early hours of Friday morning, I arrived at the Royal Lancaster Infirmary with my sick son in an ambulance, and the nurse who was treating him, as we walked past trolleys in the corridor, said, "Our A&E is too small. We were promised a new hospital 4 years ago, but I think they've forgotten about us." Can the Minister tell my constituent whether or not we've forgotten about the new hospital in Lancaster?
Well, the Honourable Lady knows my knowledge not only of that hospital but of her local area. I will look into this matter for her, because I want to ensure that the good people of Lancashire, Mr. Speaker, are looked after as we would all hope and expect.
Forward to one at shortly. Jeremy Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I warmly welcome what my right honourable friend last week said about encouraging research into lobular breast cancer, and I'm looking forward to meeting the Health Minister shortly to work out how we operationalise what is her clear ambition.
May I thank my right honourable friend for bringing two amazing women, along with my honourable friend for Bishop's Auckland, two amazing women to talk to me about the impacts on lobular cancer. Just to assist members across the House, we sent out a dear colleague letter and graphics last week about the women's health strategy, so we can all help our constituents understand what this Conservative government is doing to ensure that the health care of women is faster, simpler and fairer.
That completes questions. Front bench, move round. Right, we now come to the statement. I call the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At my order overnight, the RAF engaged in a second wave of strikes against Houthi military targets in Yemen. We did so because we continue to see, including in intelligence, an ongoing and imminent threat from the Houthis to UK commercial and military vessels and to those of our partners in the Red Sea and wider region. I told the House last week that we would not hesitate to respond if the acts continue in order to protect innocent lives and preserve the freedom of navigation. And that is what we have done. We acted alongside the United States with support from Australia, Bahrain, Canada and the Netherlands. We acted on the same basis as the 11th of January, fully in line with international law, in self-defence and in response to a persistent threat. And as with the first wave, the strikes were limited to carefully selected targets with maximum care taken to protect civilian lives. Mr. Speaker, attempting to counter every Houthi attack after it has been launched is simply not sustainable. We have already shot down dozens of missiles and drones targeted at civilian vessels and at the Royal Navy. And the Houthis have conducted at least 12 further attacks on shipping since the 11th of January, including just last night, shortly before our strikes were conducted. So we acted to further degrade their ability to mount such attacks. Last week, I gave the House our initial assessment of the first wave of strikes. Since then, we have seen further evidence that they were successful in degrading the Houthis' military capability. Last night, we hit 2 military sites just north of Sana'a, each containing multiple specific targets which the Houthis used to support their attacks on shipping. And Mr. Speaker, I want to be very clear. We are not seeking a confrontation. We urge the Houthis and those who enable them to stop these illegal and unacceptable attacks. But if necessary, the United Kingdom will not hesitate to respond again in self-defence. We cannot stand by and allow these attacks to go unchallenged. Inaction is also a choice. With that in mind, Mr. Speaker, and given the persistent nature of the threat, it was important to update to the House again today. I listened carefully to honourable and right honourable members last week, and so we will give the House a chance for a full debate on our broader approach in the Red Sea tomorrow. Mr. Speaker, we took extensive steps to address this threat to international security before taking military action. We launched Operation Prosperity Guardian in December with over 20 other countries. The international community issued repeated statements on the 1st of December, the 19th of December, the 3rd of January, the 12th of January, condemning the attacks and urging the Houthis to desist. On the 10th of January, the United Nations Security Council passed a resolution demanding that they stop the attacks. And I think it is important to note also that the internationally recognised government of Yemen has also condemned the Houthis for their actions, accusing them of creating a conflict for propaganda, serving only their own selfish ends. Mr. Speaker, as we saw in the House last week, members are rightly keen to hear how this situation could be brought to an end. The answer must include the vital right to self-defence when we're attacked. But that is only one part of our wider response, which I want to say more about today. First, we are increasing our diplomatic engagement because we recognise the deep concerns about and the complexities of the current situation. I spoke to President Biden about these issues last night. The Foreign Secretary will be in the region in the coming days, and he met his Iranian counterpart last week. He made clear that they must cease supplying the Houthis with weapons and intelligence and use their influence to stop Houthi attacks. Second, we must end the illegal flow of arms to the Houthi militia. We have intercepted weapon shipments in the region before, including components of the very missiles used by the Houthis today. This brings home the importance of maritime security in the region, and that includes working closely with our allies and partners to disrupt and deter the supply of weapons and components. Third, we are going to use the most effective means at our disposal to cut off the Houthis' financial resources where they are used to fund these attacks. We are working closely with the United States on this and plan to announce new sanction measures in the coming days. Fourth, we need to keep helping the people of Yemen, who have suffered so terribly as a result of the country's civil war. We will continue to deliver humanitarian aid and support a negotiated peace in that conflict, not just because it's the right thing to do, but also because we need to show the people of Yemen that we have no quarrel with them, as the Yemeni government itself understands. So, Mr. Speaker, this is our strategy, and we will keep all other tools under close review as well. Mr. Speaker, I repeat that there is no link between our actions of self-defence in the Red Sea and the situation in Israel and Gaza. Those who make that link do the Houthis work for them. And I want to be clear that those here at home who glorify the Houthis' attacks are glorifying terrorism, plain and simple. They will be met with a zero-tolerance approach. Now, all of that said, Mr. Speaker, I would like to address the situation in Israel and Gaza directly because it remains at the forefront of members' minds. President Biden and I again discussed this yesterday, and he shares my deep concerns about the situation, about the terrible suffering and loss of civilian lives. So together we are working to establish a new aid route through the port of Ashdod. And Mr. Speaker, the UK wants to see an end to the fighting in Gaza as soon as possible. We are calling for an immediate humanitarian pause to get aid in and hostages out as a vital step towards building a sustainable, permanent ceasefire without a return to destruction, fighting, and loss of life. But to achieve that, Hamas must agree to the release of all hostages. They can no longer be in charge of Gaza. The threat from Hamas terror and rocket attacks must end, and an agreement must be in place for the Palestinian Authority to return to Gaza to provide governance services and security. That is the pathway to peace that should unite the whole House. And I believe we are also united in support of a two-state solution. Mr. Speaker, through all the complexity of the current situation, our principles hold firm. Resolute in the face of threats, compassionate in support of those in need, and determined in maintaining stability, security, and the rule of law. That is what our allies and partners have come to expect from the United Kingdom. That is what we stand for, and I commend this statement to the House.
I now call the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Prime Minister for advance copy of his statement. Labour said we will judge further action on the Houthis on a case-by-case basis. So let me be clear, we back this targeted action to reinforce maritime security in the Red Sea. The Houthi attacks must stop. They are designed to destabilise us, so we must stand united and strong. They bring danger to ordinary civilians working hard at sea, so we must protect them. And they aim to disrupt the flow of goods, food and medicines, so we must not let them go unaddressed. The professionalism and bravery of those serving on HMS Diamond and flying RAF Typhoons are both totally accepted and completely remarkable. Without them, Britain cannot be a force for good in the world. Mr. Speaker, these are, of course, the second set of strikes that the UK has participated in, and the stated aim of the first set was to deter and degrade Houthi capability. But we now know that their attacks have continued. So while we do not question the justification for action, it is right that the House hears more about their effectiveness. Labour, of course, recognises that strikes can be used to reduce threat without eliminating it, and we recognise that the military action taken is just one component of a wider diplomatic strategy. But nonetheless, I would ask the Prime Minister to set out his confidence that these strikes will be effective in reducing Houthi capabilities. And while, of course, we understand the clear legal basis for these actions, as the situation has evolved, can the Prime Minister now commit to restating and republishing the government's legal position? Mr. Speaker, alongside the UK and the US, other countries have provided non-operational support for these strikes and maritime protection in the Red Sea. Many more support the United Nations Security Council resolution that utterly condemns the Houthi attacks. So can I ask the Prime Minister what work is being done to hold together that coalition and to, if possible, enlarge that coalition? The action the UK takes must draw on the support of all those who care about international law. And given the special role the UK plays in Yemen, can he set out the concrete steps, in addition to those in his statement, that we are taking to help the people of Yemen, who have suffered terribly as a result of that country's civil war? Because, Mr. Speaker, the international community cannot allow itself to be divided. That is exactly what the Houthi backers in Tehran would love to see. And on that note, can he also update the House on whether his government has given further consideration to the prescription of the IRGC? We do need every tool at our disposal to disrupt IRGC activities, and we must show Iran that it cannot pursue its ends by destabilising the entire region. Because, like the Prime Minister, I totally reject the Houthi claims that attacking ships from around the world is somehow linked to the conflict in Gaza. These attacks do absolutely nothing for the Palestinian people. What is needed in Gaza is a humanitarian truce now, a sustainable ceasefire to stop the killing of innocent civilians, the space for the return of all the hostages, urgent humanitarian relief, and a decisive step towards a two-state solution. Because, Mr. Speaker, Palestinian statehood is the inalienable right of the Palestinian people. It is not in the gift of a neighbour. So does he agree with me that a secure Israel, alongside a viable Palestinian state, is the only path to a just and lasting peace? Because, Mr. Speaker, we must stop those who sow division. We must do what we can to disrupt and deter Houthis. And we must stay united and steadfast in defence of our values, our security and our right to self-defence. Labour will always act in the national interest, and we provide our full support for these necessary and proportionate strikes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Well, can I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his statement, but also his support, and I'm grateful to him for that. And he raises all the right questions about the action today, which I'm happy to answer. I think first he asked about the effectiveness of strikes in deterring and precisely degrading capability. I am pleased to tell him that further evidence after the initial statement I made last week has demonstrated to us that the strikes last week were effective in degrading capability and all the intended targets were destroyed. And I'm also pleased to say that our initial evidence from last night's strikes is also that all intended targets were destroyed, which demonstrates to us, and in working with our allies who have the same view, that the strikes are working to degrade capability, even as he said there may be a difference between reducing and eliminating, but we are confident that what we are doing is working to degrade capability. The targets are specifically selected on the basis of intelligence, military sites which impact the security and safety of seafarers and shipping, and to that end I'm confident that, as I said, the strikes are being carried out in a way that is effective in achieving their aim. I thank him for acknowledging that the strikes sit within a wider strategy in the region to bring about an end to what we are seeing. The Foreign Secretary will be in the region this week, engaging extensively with our partners and allies on all the topics he raised, particularly ensuring that we can continue to make progress on a sustainable peace in Yemen, and no doubt talking to our Saudi partners about that, but also, crucially, broadening the coalition of support for the action that we have taken. As I pointed to in my statement, there have been multiple statements made by a wide coalition of countries from around the world in support of action, and he can rest assured that we are continuing to expand that coalition of support, because the security of navigation and of shipping impacts all countries wherever they might be, not just in the Red Sea. I think all of us have seen the consequences of the war in Ukraine on energy bills across the European continent and beyond. So I think people are very alive to the interconnectedness of the global economy and the importance of protecting freedom of navigation everywhere. With regard to the legal advice, my understanding was that we had, or were imminently about to publish, a summary of the legal advice. I can happily give him that confirmation, but also just confirm to him that the basis for action remains the same as it was last time, but an update to that effect has been published or will shortly be published by the Attorney General. And lastly, I'll just touch on his broader point. He's right to highlight the malign influence of Iran in the region. Obviously, we don't comment on ongoing decisions or processes around prescription of organisations, but he can rest assured that we're alive to the risk and working closely with our allies, in particular the United States and our European allies, to jointly work out the most effective way of countering that influence. As I said, the Foreign Secretary spoke to his counterpart last week, and we will continue to use all measures at our disposal to protect ourselves. We passed the National Security Act here in the UK and have already sanctioned the IRGC in its entirety. But more generally on the specific action that we have taken, I thank him again for his support. We have taken limited, proportionate, and I believe necessary action in self-defence. We will always reserve the right to do that, to protect innocent lives and freedom of navigation. Our desired outcome, of course, is for the Houthis to desist, to de-escalate the situation. What they are doing is unacceptable and illegal, and the onus should be on them to stop it. But we will use all levers at our disposal, including diplomacy and sanctions, to achieve that objective.
Chair of the Defence Select Committee, Jeremy Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome what my right honourable friend says about diplomatic and humanitarian efforts and indeed cutting off the supply of arms. I particularly welcome what he says about the effectiveness of the strikes that have already taken place. But would he, however, agree that in order to protect civilian shipping, this may need to be a prolonged and persistent targeted campaign alongside our allies?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I can thank my honourable friend for his question. I just want to be absolutely clear that no decision has been taken to embark on a sustained campaign of the nature that he mentioned. These were limited strikes specifically in response to threats that we perceived, but we do reserve the right to take action in self-defence, as I've said. But crucially, the military action is just one part of a broader strategy, diplomatic, sanctions and others. We will use all levers to bring about an end to the disruption and the illegality that the Houthis are causing.
Leader of the SNP, Stephen Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Freedom of navigation is not a choice, it is indeed a necessity, not least because of the impact it could have upon all of the people we are very fortunate to represent. As such, as a point of principle, I think it's fair for the government to use proportionate and robust action to defend that right to freedom of navigation. However, for all of us in this chamber, we do, of course, need to be mindful of the opponent that we face in this regard. The Houthis have been under constant, almost constant, bombardment from Saudi Arabia for the best part of 8 years. They didn't get that message, so why are we so confident that they will get our message this time around? And that, of course, leads to the wider question of what is the ultimate strategy here going forward, not just in relation to the Houthis, but in relation to the wider region. Because over the course of the last week, we have seen missile strikes in Iran, in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Pakistan, in Syria, and, of course, in Yemen. Meantime, we continue to see the complete destruction of Gaza, and, of course, Hamas continue to obtain hostages themselves. We need, Mr. Speaker, to understand the government's strategy, not just to calm waters in the Red Sea, but to calm waters right across the region. And surely that must begin with a ceasefire in Gaza.
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd just say to the honourable gentleman that as difficult as the situation is, to do nothing would also be a choice. And I believe it would be the wrong choice, because it would be tantamount to ceding control of a global shipping route which is economically vital to a dangerous militant group which is backed by Iran and putting innocent lives at risk. But he's right, the military action should sit within a broader strategy, which hopefully he can see from my statement we are engaged in on all fronts. And with regard specifically to the point he raises about Israel and Gaza, as I've been clear, no one wants to see this conflict go on for a moment longer than necessary. An immediate pause is necessary to get aid in and hostages out. That's what we have been calling for. And the best outcome will be moving from that pause to a sustainable ceasefire. But as I also was clear in my statement, there are a number of things that need to happen for that to be possible. That involves the release of all the hostages by Hamas, Hamas no longer being in charge of Gaza, and an agreement for the Palestinian Authority to return to Gaza to provide governance. So that's a conversation that we've been having, and we'll continue to push for that, because I believe that will be the best outcome and is one that is widely supported, I would imagine, by everyone in this House.
Just to help the Chamber, some people were late. We're only going to run this for an hour. So please, try and help each other by being as quickly as we can. Let's go to the Chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. List your counts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome these airstrikes, which were conducted solely to re-establish freedom of maritime movement. There are a number, however, of Iranian proxies and allied groups operating across the Middle East, and the hand of Iran is clear within their activities. Iran is the fundamental threat to UK security and stability in the region. So can I ask what the strategic approach and intent is to comprehensively reduce the threat from all the proxies and allies that we face, so we don't end up playing whack-a-mole? Can I also ask if we've seen any opportunism from Al-Qaeda, Arabian Peninsula or Daesh, who are also on the ground in Iran? And finally, since he touched on Gaza, Israel, can I please reiterate my request for the UK to launch a contact group for Palestine so that we can launch track 2 negotiations to get some progress towards stability and a two-state solution?
Prime Minister.
Perfect. Well, so the behaviour of the Iranian regime, including the actions of the IRGC, pose a significant threat to the safety and security of the United Kingdom and our allies, and particularly Iran's actual direct threats against people here in the UK, as well as their destabilising influence in the region. So it's a threat we're alive to. That's why we've already sanctioned more than 400 Iranian individuals, including the IRGC, as I said, in its entirety. And the National Security Act last year provides new measures for our police and security services to counter the hostile influence that we see. Our foreign minister spoke to his Iranian counterpart last week. We'll continue that diplomacy this week. And as I pointed to in my statement, we have previously interdicted the supply of Iranian missiles being smuggled to the Houthis last year and the year before. And that's something that we need to ensure we work with our allies to do, because the flow of these weapons to the Houthis is critical to their ability to carry out these attacks, and working with our allies, we should try and do everything we can to stop that.
Ed Davey.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Prime Minister for his statement? As I made clear last week, the Liberal Democrats accept the case for limited strikes against the Houthis as long as they remain limited. But as the Prime Minister updates the House for the second time on this matter, there's remarkably little clarity about what the next steps are and when UK's objectives will be judged to have been fulfilled. Nor has the Prime Minister sufficiently addressed how he plans to avoid regional escalation in this most fragile of regions. And can I thank him for agreeing that this House can debate this matter tomorrow, but will he not give the House the opportunity to vote on this matter, not least given the huge cross-party support there are for limited strikes, which will surely strengthen the signal that he intends to give?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, what is escalatory is the Houthis ramping up attacks on commercial shipping and launching missiles and drones against US and UK warships and threatening allied bases in the region. I'd be very clear, military action was a last resort. We provided warning after warning, including with allies and at the UN Security Council. And the Houthis had and continue to have the ability to prevent this by stopping their illegal attacks. And as I pointed out earlier, there are also risks to inaction, because it would damage international security, damage the global economy, and send a message that British vessels' lives and interests are fair game, none of which I think is acceptable. I'm pleased the House will have an opportunity to debate this tomorrow, but as I said, we reserve the right to take action in a limited, proportionate and legal way in self-defence. That's the right thing, and I think the country would expect nothing less from the government.
Dominic Raab.
Speaker, can I welcome the Prime Minister's statement and action? And on the issue of Iran, can he say what contingency planning has been done in the eventuality that Houthi attacks in the Red Sea are followed up by IRGC attacks in the Persian Gulf?
Prime Minister.
Oh, can I thank my honourable friend for his question? He's right to point out the link between Iran and the Houthis. As I said, something we are alive to, something I discussed with President Biden last night. He'll know that we have assets in the region and we are working closely with our allies to ensure maritime security, whether that's interdicting arms and more generally ensuring the freedom of navigation. Diplomacy will also have to play a part, which is why the Foreign Secretary's conversations with his Iranian counterpart are so important, but we remain alive to the risks and we'll do everything we can to reduce them.
Eric Twig.
Thank you, Speaker. The Prime Minister's right to do nothing is not an option. But to do something also is the need of a strategy. So can I ask the Prime Minister, if the attacks continue and there's this continued disruption of maritime trade, does he have a plan B?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, That's why we are working extensively with our allies, broadening the international coalition of support, condemning the Houthis' behaviour and putting pressure on them in all different ways. It's important that military action is not seen in isolation. It sits alongside a wider diplomatic strategy and economic strategy, and as I said, we'll be bringing forward new sanctions measures together with our allies in the coming days.
Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I express my full support for the action that the Prime Minister has approved? But could I ask my right honourable friend to extend his strategic objectives? Because it seems that this threat will remain so long as the Houthis have a safe haven to operate from. And it is a question of how we deal with what is effectively an ungoverned space, that part of Yemen.
Yep. Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, what's clear is that the Houthis' behaviour is actually damaging the people of Yemen. We talked previously about the importance of the supply of food into Yemen, but also their destruction of oil infrastructure deprives the Yemeni people of key revenue. These are all topics that we are engaged with our Saudi partners. We very much support the negotiations. There was a deal announced, as he knows, in December. We'd like to see a lasting peace and security for the Yemeni people through an inclusive political settlement, and I can assure him that diplomatically we're working very hard to achieve that aim.
Imran Hussain.
Prime Minister rightly states that the majority of this House supports a two-state solution to bring a lasting peace. But this is clearly not shared by the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, members of his far-right cabinet, nor the Israeli ambassador to the UK, who openly advocating genocide on the UK airwaves, who have all rejected an independent state of Palestine. Will the Prime Minister make it clear to the Israeli Prime Minister that he condemns his comments for standing in the way of peace, and will he condemn the vile comments of the Israeli ambassador who labelled every building in Gaza as a legitimate target for the Israeli military?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Foreign Secretary will be in the region this week, and he will reiterate what I have reiterated publicly and from this dispatch box, that we are absolutely committed to a two-state solution. We believe it is the right outcome for the people in the region. We want Palestinians and Israelis to be able to live side by side with peace and security and dignity, and we will redouble our efforts to bring about that outcome.
Tobias Elwood.
Mr. Speaker, Yemen is a complex, war-torn and troubled country that's never really settled since North and South united in 1990. Today, the civil war means two-thirds of the population require humanitarian support. As Middle East Minister, I spent a lot of time with the United Nations, the US and Gulf nations to build a suitable governance and security framework. Would the Prime Minister agree our attention on Yemen should not just include removing the immediate threat in the Red Sea, but a fresh, more cognitive approach to resolving the longer-term governance issues in this troubled country, or the threat will remain?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his previous efforts, and as he knows, we're a penholder on Yemen in the UN, and we continue to use our diplomatic and political influence to support UN efforts to bring about that lasting peace to Yemen through an inclusive political settlement. And the British people can also be very proud of what we're doing to support the Yemeni people from a humanitarian perspective. We've committed over £1 billion in aid since the conflict began in 2014, and this year we will be, I believe, the fourth or fifth largest donor to the UN's appeal.
Valerie Vars.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What assessment has he made of the risks if the Houthis move to a different part of Yemen, and how many civilian casualties have there been so far?
Prime Minister.
I'm pleased to say that our intelligence suggests that there were no civilian casualties from the strikes that we conducted last week. That will, of course, have been our intention this time around as well. We take very careful time to pick targets and minimise any civilian casualties and impacts. As I said, last time we believe there were none, and we have no evidence to suggest that there were any this time around, but of course that is just an initial assessment.
Blake Drummond.
Speaker, can I thank the Prime Minister for the update on the continued humanitarian aid to Yemen, and I totally agree with him with the action he's taken to protect shipping. But there are rumours that the Houthis may become a proscribed terrorist organisation. Can I ask whether these rumours are true, as it would have a major impact on any humanitarian aid sent to Houthi-controlled territories, which include about 70% of the population?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as my honourable friend will know, we do not comment on prescription processes or decisions on any group, so she'll appreciate there's not much I can say on that. And just to clarify, it is worth pointing out that the United States have designated the Houthi group as what they call a specially designated terrorist group, which is different to full prescription.
John MacDonald.
At the moment, the Houthi attacks are continuing on. The PMU are attacking US bases in Syria. The Hezbollah are a low-level war with Israel in Lebanon. And in Gaza yesterday, 24 Israeli military were killed. 24,000 Palestinians have now died. And we listened, 25,000 we're told. We now listened this morning to a doctor amputating children's limbs in Gaza without anaesthetics. Does he not realise that without an immediate ceasefire, any strategy, any hope of a strategy succeeding will fail, and that the Netanyahu cabinet has now become an obstacle to peace rather than a partner in peace?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I said, no one wants to see the conflict in Gaza go on a moment longer than is necessary. An immediate pause is now needed to get aid in and hostages out, and the best outcome will be moving from that pause to a sustainable ceasefire. But that sustainable permanent ceasefire does require a set of conditions for it to be truly sustainable and permanent, and that involves the release of all hostages and Hamas having no role in Gaza, particularly to fire rockets continually into Israel. And that's a sustainable ceasefire that we are pushing for.
Sir Desmond Sway.
If the Houthis persist, have we the capability to remove the threat, and will we do it?
Prime Minister.
I think, as my honourable friend can see, that we will always back up our words with action. We've been clear that we won't tolerate risk to innocent lives and British interests in the region, and we will take action where necessary in a limited, proportionate way in compliance with international law in self-defence. That's what we did last week, that's what we have done this week, and we will always reserve the right to do that to protect British lives and interests.
John Pratt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's clear that the partisans of God, the Houthi militia, are fascists and racist. They're backed by fascists and racists in Tehran. So further to earlier questions, and this has been asked time and time and time again on both sides of the House, when are we going to get around to fully prescribing the IRGC?
Here. Prime Minister.
Well, as I've said previously, we don't routinely comment on groups that may or may not be being considered for prescription, but we have taken significant action against the IRGC, including sanctioning them in their entirety and passing new laws here at home to make sure that we can protect ourselves, but critically working with our allies so that we can jointly determine what is the most effective way to combat the risk that Iran poses to us.
Anthony Bagdell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I congratulate the Prime Minister on a robust response, and the right to navigate is indisputable, but the damage has already been done. Tankers are avoiding the Gulf of Aden, they are avoiding the Red Sea, and they're avoiding using the Suez Canal. Freight rates are now soaring, and the impact of that on European refineries is likely to be significant. Can the Prime Minister perhaps give us a little bit more about what's going to be done for armed convoys, as well as restoring confidence that people and vessels will be able to navigate through that stretch of water?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question. The Transport Secretary has engaged extensively with the industry. He will have seen the statements from leading shipping companies after last week's strike that they welcomed that action was being taken to restore that security. But I'd also point him to Operation Prosperity Guardian, a coalition of over 20 countries. More are sending assets into the region to ensure the safety of all civilian and commercial shipping through the Red Sea. It's a critical economic strait, but also there's a principle at stake which we must defend.
Marshal Cordova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The war in Gaza and the situation in the Middle East is worsening every day. We know that there are over 25,000 people have been killed, 10,000 children, and not to mention approximately 135 children are suffering from severe malnutrition. We know the only way to de-escalate this violence in Gaza and the crisis in the Red Sea will be through securing an immediate ceasefire, not a pause, but an immediate ceasefire. So why won't the Prime Minister commit to calling for this so that we can see an end to this humanitarian catastrophe and the killing of innocent children?
Prime Minister.
I'll point the Honourable Lady to my previous comments on that topic, but just highlight that we've trebled our aid commitment for this financial year. We're working with partners in the region to increase aid in. So again, something I discussed with President Biden yesterday, because we recognise the humanitarian impact that the conflict is having, but the UK is playing a leading role in getting more humanitarian aid, and as I said, right now we will work with the Americans on opening up Ashdod so we have a new maritime corridor to increase the flows.
Dr. Lisa Cameron.
Many thanks, Mr Speaker, and I refer the House to my register. I thank the Prime Minister for his resolute work, including the wider update on humanitarian aid and work to release hostages. Families of hostages and those hostages released will be suffering unconscionable long-term psychological trauma. So can we, in addition to physical aid, look at providing psychological supports and expertise from the UK wherever needed for all those so gravely impacted?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank my honourable friend for her excellent point? And like her, I've spent time with hostage families, including just yesterday, and she's right about the trauma that they are experiencing. Every family that we're in contact with will have dedicated support for the Foreign Office to provide them with what they need, and I'll continue to make sure that the issue she raises gets the attention it deserves. But what she highlights is the importance of pauses and ceasefires, ensuring the release unconditionally of all those hostages. They and their families are undergoing something that no one would wish to have happen to them, and it's important that we prioritise them in all these conversations.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I and many others will be disappointed at the Prime Minister's failure to condemn the increasingly violent and extreme language by Netanyahu and his ministers, and I would invite him to do so again. The Prime Minister said 10 days ago that the airstrikes against Houthi targets sent a clear message. The Foreign Secretary said this morning that more strikes send the clearest message. Can the Prime Minister tell us where this will end, since the only message, whether he likes it or not, actually being received in the region is the UK's failure to back an end to the suffering in Gaza?
Prime Minister.
Again, I urge the Honourable Lady not to link and conflate these two things, because, no, she's right. It is the Houthis that are doing that, and it's right that we call that out as being wrong, as the government of Yemen themselves have done so. It is absolutely right that we take necessary proportionate action in self-defence against risk to British lives and interests. That's what we did last week. That's what we have done this week, and we will always reserve the right to do so. And in parallel and separately, we're also doing everything we can to bring about more aid into Gaza and a sustainable ceasefire there that involves a release of hostages and the end of Hamas's hostilities.
Greg Smith.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I welcome the Prime Minister's statement, and the actions of self-defence against the Houthis are the right thing to do. But over the last 24 hours, the BBC have carried reports that senior IRGC generals have made extremist speeches to United Kingdom students riddled with anti-Semitism and the promotion of violence. This radicalisation simply must stop. So what steps is my honourable friend taking to end IRGC infiltration in the United Kingdom? And whilst I fully acknowledge that he won't comment on prescription at the dispatch box, will he at least acknowledge the strength of feeling from all sides of this House across the political divide for the prescription of the IRGC, which is behind so much violence in the region, including the barbaric attacks of the 7th of October and the continuing attacks in the Red Sea?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I firstly stress that it's an absolute priority to protect the UK against foreign interference, and we will use all available levers to do that. And on the particular matter that he raised in the reports, I know that the Charity Commission have opened an ongoing compliance case into trusts linked to their Canoon Islamic Centre, so it's right that that investigation happens properly. But more broadly, universities do have a duty to prevent people being drawn into terrorism, and where there is evidence that universities are failing in that duty, then I'm happy to reassure him that the government will not hesitate to intervene to ensure that the right steps are taken.
Debbie Abrahams.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I also share the concerns about what the strategy is, what the contagion to the rest of the Middle East will be, and that we are potentially bolstering Houthis' position in Yemen. But can I ask the Prime Minister about a constituents partner who, I mentioned this to the Leader of the House last Thursday. He has been waiting evacuation from South Gaza for a number of months now. He now has suffered a broken leg. He's receiving no healthcare. So can I urge the Prime Minister to liaise with the Israeli and Egyptian authorities for his immediate evacuation? It can't carry on. Thank you.
Prime Minister.
I'm very happy to do that, and I'll follow up with the Leader of the House on the Honourable Lady's case.
James Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The threat to maritime shipping in the Red Sea is not just from Houthi missiles, but from the threat of cyber attacks, often coming from Iranian proxies. So would the Prime Minister agree with me that there's an urgent need to strengthen the cyber resilience of our maritime partners in order to make sure that they do not are not susceptible to the threat of cyber attack, which may disable them and cause multiple problems?
Yeah.
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend makes an excellent point, and that's why previously we've created and funded the National Cyber Security Centre, which is something that our allies respect us for having global leadership on. But I think his point is well made, and I'll ensure that we are spreading our best practice to allies in the region.
Kenny McCaskill.
The root cause, the key to addressing violence is to address the root cause, not just the manifestations. The Red Sea is inextricably linked to the events in Gaza. Rather than bombing the Houthis, who have been bombed for a decade by Saudi Arabia with the best military equipment that Britain and America could sell them, is it not time that we actually supported South Africa and other countries at the International Court of Justice in addressing the root cause, which is the genocide unfolding in Palestine?
No, I just say I disagree with the honourable gentleman, and we disagree with what South Africa have brought to the ICJ, and don't believe that it is helpful, but also disagree with them that these two things are linked. The Houthis have carried out attacks on multiple ships from different countries, many of which have nothing to do with the situation in Israel and Gaza, and as the government of Yemen itself has pointed out, this has nothing to do with that, and they are using this for propaganda for their own selfish ends.
Stephen Timms.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has referred to the international support for the actions in the Red Sea, but why have only US and UK forces actually taken part in them?
Prime Minister.
Well, I'd say to the honourable gentleman, we also received support from Canada, Australia, the Netherlands and Bahrain in these particular strikes, as we did last time. But I would also point him to the statements that have been put out previously from over a dozen countries, including New Zealand, Korea, Singapore and others, but also the UN Security Council resolution from the 10th of January, which was unequivocal in condemning the Houthi attacks and acknowledging the right of member states, in accordance with international law, to defend their vessels from attacks.
Leila Moran.
Speaker, we now have 25,000 dead. We have 130 hostages still there. My extended family are still trapped. And whilst you want to have hope, I dare say it has now turned to complete despondency. He will have heard, I'm sure with dismay, the words of Netanyahu when he said that he is categorically against two states. Yeah. This echoes the equally awful words of Hamas, who say the same thing. Does he not agree that what we have here are the extremes of the debate? And what words of hope does he have to offer those voices in Israel, Palestine and beyond, who cling on desperately for the light in this darkness?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank the honourable lady for her question and her comments, but agree with her that we are committed to a two-state solution, because that is the only way we can bring about a future where Palestinians and Israelis can live side by side with the security that they deserve, with dignity and with opportunity. And the events of the last few months remind us that we must redouble our efforts to bring about that outcome, and I remain confident, because of the engagement that we're having, that we can make progress on that aim.
Alex Sobel.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Prime Minister, you said, we urge the Houthis and those who enable them to stop these illegal and unacceptable attacks. You then only spoke about Iran. So the Prime Minister only spoke about Iran in terms of those that enable them. Who else is enabling the Houthis, and what action are the UK and its allies doing to stop them and their supply of weapons and other support to the Houthis?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I particularly mentioned Iran with good reason, because they are one of the primary suppliers of weapons to the Houthis, and that's why in the past we have interdicted those shipments, and their behaviour remains of primary concern to us. They are the significant destabilising actor in the region and will continue to be a focus of our diplomatic efforts. But more broadly, we want to see peace and stability in the region across the board, and diplomatically and otherwise we will work hard to bring that about.
Sana Begum.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Further violence will not achieve peace. Aid agencies are warning that the UK-US continuing to bomb Yemen is threatening civilian populations and limiting humanitarian assistance from reaching millions who are already enduring starvation. Instead of escalating risks to civilian populations in the region, why can't the Prime Minister just support the growing and increasing calls internationally for an immediate ceasefire in Israel-Gaza, an end to the bloodshed in Gaza, an end to the attacks on Yemen, and call for peace, justice and human rights?
Again, I would not draw a link between the action in the Red Sea and the situation in Gaza. They are two completely different things, and whilst the Houthis may seek to link them, we should not pander to that narrative. We've actually been in touch with our NGO partners, and they've confirmed no significant disruption to humanitarian efforts following our airstrikes. Again, we help to feed around 100,000 Yemenis every single month. And again, I would urge her to recognise that the Houthis' activities actually damage the Yemeni people who are entirely reliant on food coming in through those shipping lanes.
Stephen Ferry.
Thank you. The Prime Minister sketched out some of the government's view as to what are the terms for a sustainable ceasefire in relation to Gaza. But can I ask the Prime Minister, what steps is the government taking to discuss a long-term peace plan for the region, including a two-state solution with other states, in particular friendly states in the region, to ensure that we actually make some real progress towards that objective?
Prime Minister.
I can reassure the honourable gentleman that we are having exactly that conversation with all our partners and allies in the region. I started that dialogue when I visited the region towards the end of last year. The Foreign Secretary will be in the region again this week, and something President Biden and I discussed. I believe we're aligned on the future that we all want to see for the people of Israel and Gaza, and now we will work constructively with our allies to try and make sure that that can happen.
Andrew Gwynn.
Can I press the Prime Minister a little bit more on the issue of Palestine? Because whilst he is right to say in his statement that President Biden and he are united in support of a two-state solution, the Prime Minister will be acutely aware that the person who is likely to be President Biden's main challenger in November's elections almost certainly is not in favour of a two-state solution, and nor actually is the Israeli Prime Minister. So what is the Prime Minister and the British government doing to use this narrow window of opportunity to really push for that two-state solution?
Prime Minister.
Just refer the honourable gentleman to my previous answer. We are absolutely committed to a two-state solution and will work very hard with all our allies to make progress towards that aim.
Alison Thewlis.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Yemeni analyst Hisham al-Omisi is no friend of the Houthis. They in fact took him hostage some time ago. But he has been raising concerns about the way in which these blunt military actions will play into the Houthi narrative against America and the UK. So can I ask the Prime Minister, how does he intend to challenge that political narrative and ensure that the Yemeni people don't play into the Houthi hands with the action that he's taken?
Prime Minister.
Well, I'd say we're in dialogue with the Yemeni government, and they themselves are doing their best to counter the narrative that she mentioned. But also, I would just say, rather than characterise these as blunt strikes, they are actually very deliberate, very careful, targeted strikes on military sites, minimising the impact on civilians, and we will continue to make sure that that point is heard loud and clear.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Houthis have already said we should expect a response to these strikes. Benjamin Netanyahu's words have further inflamed opportunities for peace between Israel and Palestine. There have been attacks in Pakistan by Iran. Clearly, the situation is escalating. We need all the partners and to collaborate as best we can if we are going to secure a ceasefire, end these attacks on shipping and get that two-state solution. The Prime Minister has talked about talking to our allies.
Can he set out what conversations he's had with colleagues in the European Union who have their own peace initiative in the region and where he thinks that will get to?
Prime Minister.
Well, I regularly speak to colleagues across Europe, including just this morning with the Belgian Prime Minister, and we'll work with all our allies on these issues. We have done in the past and we will continue to do so, and I believe we're all united in the outcome that we want to see, which is a two-state solution where Israelis and Palestinians can live side by side with peace, security and dignity.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome very much the Prime Minister's statement and for his very clear, firm stance, and it's good to have that. Will the Prime Minister confirm which steps will be taken to further secure the safe passage, bearing in mind the fact that shipping companies have been forced to increase the price of shipping for enhanced protection? Elim Church Missions from my constituency of Strangford at this moment are sending humanitarian containers to Aswatani in Southern Africa. The increased prices for the containers to this end, and what else can be done, Prime Minister, to alleviate not only this international front, but the direct impact on our constituents who are already struggling with increased prices and stagnant wages? Thank you.
The Honourable Gentleman is right to point out the economic impact of a tax on shipping on everyone here at home and indeed across the world. There is a meaningful economic cost to container ships rerouting round the Cape of Good Hope. That's an important reason for why we must have freedom of navigation and demonstrates why it's right that we take action, and Prosperity Guardian is the operation that is providing more maritime security in the area.
Richard Bergen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And following on from the Prime Minister's comments on Gaza, 25,000 people have now been killed in Gaza. So isn't it time that our government did more than express sympathies and instead used its diplomatic power to prevent more deaths there, starting by bringing a UN Security Council motion calling for an immediate ceasefire and by ending arms sales to Israel?
Well, Mr. Speaker, our actions are clear. We've trebled our aid commitment this year. We're doing everything we can to open more crossings, and recently we worked to deliver a new humanitarian land corridor from Jordan into Gaza with 750 tonnes of life-saving food and aid arriving at its first delivery. So we can be proud of the impact that we're having, but of course there's more to do, and that's why we'll continue to have those conversations to get more aid in.
Andrew Slaughter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister says that he supports a two-state solution. That requires his government to recognise the state of Palestine alongside the state of Israel. When will he do that?
Prime Minister.
The position of this government is the same as those of previous governments. It's been long-standing, and that's that we will recognise a Palestinian state at a time that best serves the peace process.
Emma Hardy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are 21 million people starving and in desperate need of food and aid in Yemen. How will the Prime Minister ensure that the military action taken by the British government doesn't impede that desperately needed humanitarian support?
Prime Minister.
Refer the Honourable Lady to my previous answer. In fact, the Houthis' disruption of Red Sea shipping is harming the Yemeni people who are reliant on those corridors to bring aid in. But as I said, we are the fourth or fifth largest donor to the UN appeal this year and have contributed £1 billion since the conflict began in 2014 and are currently helping to feed 100,000 people in Yemen every month.
Jamie Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It will surely be a great concern that the Royal Navy is now almost too small to carry out its many responsibilities, including those that the Prime Minister has told us about today. Can the Prime Minister assure this House that this issue, this important issue, will be placed top of the agenda at the next Defence Review?
Prime Minister.
I'm pleased to tell the Honourable Gentleman that the MOD is receiving significant extra funds, £24 billion at the last spending review, and billions of pounds since then to rebuild stockpiles, ensure the sustainability of our defence nuclear enterprise, and in particular the Royal Navy has a very ambitious capital programme, and as he can see, they have successfully carried out the operations that we need them to, and they deserve our thanks and praise for their work.
Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister spoke about maritime security in the region, particularly in relation to stemming illegal sales, illegal arms getting into Yemen. How does the UK's abilities and capabilities to contribute to wider maritime security, how will they be affected by considerations to decommission HMS Westminster and HMS Argyll after multi-million-pound refits? And when will we make a final decision whether to mothball HMS Albion and HMS Bulwark?
Prime Minister.
Well, I think as the honourable gentleman can see, we absolutely have the capabilities and personnel we need to contribute to allied operations like Prosperity Guardian, but also to take action in self-defence as we have done. We will always make sure that our armed forces have the investment they need, and under this and previous governments, they've continued to receive very significant investment, which is set to rise in the years ahead.
That completes the statement. We now come to the tribute to Sir Tony Lloyd. Before we proceed with the business, I would like to have the opportunity to remember our late colleague, Sir Tony. I first met Tony almost 30 years ago when I was standing as the candidate in Chorley in the 1997 election. Tony was Shadow Foreign Affairs Minister, and he came to Chorley, he came along to Adlington, the village I live in, and on Sutton Lane he was knocking on the doors. I've got to say, it was his charm, passion and good humour that helped convince those wavering voters to vote for me. So I'm always forever in his debt. Of course, Tony had been in the Commons for quite some time before me. In total, he served the people of Greater Manchester for 45 years. He was first elected as a member of Trafford Council in 1979. And in 1983, he was elected this House as the member for his hometown of Stratford. In 1997, he returned for Manchester Central. By that time, he'd been part of the Labour front bench team for over a decade, and Tony Blair appointed him Minister of State in the Foreign Office, serving under Robin Cook. He remained active in international affairs after leaving the FCO, as leader of the UK delegations to the Parliamentary Assembly on the Council of Europe, the Western European Union and the OSCE. He was chair of the Parliamentary Labour Party from 2006 to 2012, the longest-serving holder of that role during that last Labour government. He stood down as the Member of Parliament to become the first elected Police and Crime Commissioner for Greater Manchester. But he returned. He returned to the House for the Member of Parliament for Rochdale in 2017. Tony remained an active member of this House until very recently. In one of his final speeches in this chamber just last month, he concluded by saying, "I think the message that has come across today is that we must fight for change, that we want to seek to take place." That is a first summary of Tony's attitude to public service. He was truly a great Member of Parliament. However, although he took politics seriously, Tony didn't take himself seriously. He had a very dry, even mischievous sense of humour. But overwhelmingly, he left an impression of kindness and decency with those who dealt with him. I've got to say, Tony was an impressive Member of Parliament. He was an impressive person. But his politics was shaped by his mother. His father died young, and his mother introduced him into the Labour movement. And it was the Labour movement that shaped the person that we talk about today. So I've got to say, I will always be in awe of the kindness, his generosity, and the support that he always gave me. Even on that day, as he came out of hospital, Tony was thinking of others. I was pleased to have had a chance to have a chat with him, to share a few jokes, reminisce a bit. But typical of Tony, because one of the most difficult things you have to do is phone somebody whose life is coming to an end. And I wondered how I could make that phone call. But I've got to tell you, Tony made it so easy for me. And it was that kind of person. He put me at ease when it was meant to be the other way around. But that's the person that we're talking about. So he made sure it wasn't a difficult conversation. I didn't know that that would be the last time we'd ever speak. But I'm so glad that we did. We have not only lost a great colleague and friend, the country has lost one of the nicest and most effective MPs. But while we're in this House, and those who work for him mourn his loss, our thoughts are with the family who are watching the tributes today. From the gallery, his wife, Judith, his children and his great-granddaughters. I hope the tributes will give them some comfort that Tony was much loved by all sides of the House. May you rest in peace, dear Tony. I now call the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer. On a point.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The death of Sir Tony Lloyd last week was a great loss to so many people on these benches and beyond. But the sadness we feel pales in comparison to the grief that Tony's family is going through. Our hearts are with them. And I'm pleased that some of Tony's family are in the gallery today. His wife, Judith, his children, Angarad, Siobhan, Kieran and Alexandria, his son-in-law, Paul, his nephew, Sean, who I know was like a son to him, and of course his sister, Vivian. Mr. Speaker, like you, I hope they can take some comfort in the memories and tributes of colleagues today, and I hope they see just how much Tony was loved and respected here in this House, and how much he managed to achieve in his decades of public service. Mr. Speaker, I first met Tony when I was Director of Public Prosecutions and he was the Police and Crime Commissioner in Greater Manchester. We were at a sexual assault referral clinic in Greater Manchester, St Mary's, which works with organisations and individuals committed to combating violence against women and girls, providing safe places for women and girls to report what has happened to them. It is an incredible model. And I saw firsthand Tony's commitment to tackling violence against women and girls. And what really struck me when I met him for that first time was that he had the heart of a true public servant. Not grandstanding, not pretending that he had all the answers, but quietly, respectfully, working with others to deliver. And like others, I've been deeply moved, Mr. Speaker, to read and hear the many tributes to Tony, not just from these benches, but from members across the House. And I thank members across the House for the comfort they will have given Tony's family in the tributes that they have paid to him. Tributes also from the trade union movement, because Tony was a committed trade unionist, and from people who met Tony in his decades of public service. And like you, Mr. Speaker, it meant a great deal to me personally to have the opportunity to speak directly to Tony when he left hospital for the last time, the Thursday before he died, Thursday week ago. I was able to convey to him firsthand the high esteem in which he was held by everyone, and I hope that it did give him some comfort and support in those final days. Tony was held in special high esteem by his staff, Jacob, Iftikhar, Beverly, Ajira, Megan and Chris, and of course Tricia, his close friend and political confidant in Rochdale. Mr. Speaker, indeed, many of those in Tony's tight-knit group of friends used to work for him, and I know that they were by his side in his final days. That is a true tribute to Tony.